This week at the box office, Star Wars Episode 9 fails to rise to expectations, while Cats sees its box office prospects get neutered. All this and more on this episode of The Weekend Take.
You're listening to The Weekend Take, and now your host, Sean Schaefer.
Hello everyone, and welcome to The Weekend Take. I'm your host, Sean Schaefer, and joining me this week is live sound engineer and sound and re-recording mixer for film and television, Brian Zepatowski. Brian, how you doing this week?
I'm doing pretty good. How about you?
Not so shabby. Just checked out a screening. Actually, you were in attendance with me of the new Star Wars film last night, so we've got plenty to talk about when we get to that point. Otherwise, doing well. For those of you new to the show, The Weekend Take is a weekly podcast that breaks down the weekend box office results, but looks beyond the numbers at the current talking points and trends of the film industry. We'll get started the way we typically do by looking at the films that left the top 10. This week, there were 3 such instances of films that left the top 10. First up is 21 Bridges from STX Entertainment, which fell from the number 10 position down to number 16. The film took in $230,000, a roughly 81% drop from last weekend, as the film lost nearly all of its screens, probably to make room for Star Wars, dropping 1,183 screens, bringing its count all the way down to just 350 screens. The film is still averaging about $650 per screen as it brings its cume up to $27.1 million here in its 5th week of release. Also leaving the top 10 this week was Dark Waters from Focus Features, which dropped from the number 9 position down to number 13. Dark Waters took in $312,000 this week, a 84% drop from last weekend as it lost nearly all of its screens as well to make room for Skywalker, as it lost 1,661 screens to bring its count down to just 451. The film still averaged about $700 per screen and brought its cume up to $10 million in its 5th week of release as well. And lastly, leaving the top 10, is A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood from Sony Pictures, which dropped from the number 8 position down to number 11. The film took in $1.3 million, a 60% drop from last week, as it lost nearly half of its screens, losing 1,331 screens to bring its count down to 1,524. The film still averaged about $850 per screen, and in its 5th week of release, brought its cume up to $52.5 million. So Brian, looking at the 3 films that left the top 10 and just the massive screen drops that they took, obviously, to make room for Star Wars and Cats. Anything in particular stick out to you?
Nothing really stuck out to me. I was interested in checking out the 21 Bridges movie, and probably will catch A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood when it comes to streaming.
Yeah, A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood was definitely something that I wanted to check out, especially after last year's Won't You Be My Neighbor documentary on Fred Rogers. And then I started hearing murmurs about them making a biopic, so that got me interested in it. And, it's Tom Hanks. He seems to always be able to know exactly what roles to pick to give him the best opportunity he can, especially around award season.
Yeah.
As far as 21 Bridges goes, I feel bad for STX Entertainment. They haven't had the best 2019. They had a couple of really shining moments. In the beginning of the year, they had The Upside, that they had purchased off of the Weinstein Group when it went under, and that turned into a huge hit for them, making over $100 million. And then in September, they had Hustlers, which made over $100 million as well. And so those were 2 bright spots for them in the year. But they've also had their fair share of failures, most notably another property they bought from a company that went belly up when they bought the distribution rights to Playmobil, as that movie opened a few weeks back and is already essentially out of theaters, I believe, after it had the 3rd worst opening ever for a film on over 2,000 screens.
I never even heard of it.
Yeah, Playmobil, I guess, was supposed to come out all the way back in 2016, 2017 to capitalize off the success of the Lego movie franchises. And the company that was making it and putting it out ended up going bankrupt. And so STX stepped in, bought the distribution rights to the $75 million budgeted picture. And the film, I think its entire domestic run maybe made about $1.2 million.
Was this a animated film or live action?
Animated film, basically the Lego movie, but with Playmobil toys.
Yeah, at $75 million, that doesn't seem like a very good business decision to me.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if STX paid 75 million for it. I know that the budget of the film was 75 million, which is probably why the company went belly up. So for STX, they've had some low points and high points, and for me, 21 Bridges to them has to be a low point. They put a lot of hype behind it. I mean, the first commercials for it started airing during the Super Bowl. They were trying to capitalize off of Chadwick Boseman's rising star from being in the Black Panther films, but I just don't think that for looking at MCU films and looking at this particular film, I don't think there's a lot of cross pollination of the audiences that are going to see those two films, but I could be wrong. I mean, you said you wanted to see it and you're a fan of the MCU.
Yeah, it's only because I like my action flicks. So that, it looked like it might have been a pretty good one.
It's unfortunate for SCX and 21 Bridges, but they can't all be winners, and SCX already had a couple of really good ones earlier this year. And then as far as Dark Waters goes, I didn't really know too much about the film, and I didn't really have a tremendous amount of interest in it, so I'm not really surprised to see this one go. Although what is interesting is much like last week. So last week there were 3 films that left the top 10. They're all in their 6th week of release. This week, there are 3 films that leave the top 10. They're all in their 5th week of release. So it really seems like, much like in the summertime, because of a busy box office season, or just a trend in general, films don't seem to have much of a shelf life at the box office. I mean, you're looking at 3 films that are in their 5th week of release, and they're already on their way out.
Yeah, but I think that could be because a lot of these movies that people have that are coming out now are ones that people have been looking forward to. So, and these others, like you said, Dark Waters, I don't know anything about it. Really have no interest to see it. Might catch it on streaming, but I'm not going to go out of my way to try to go see it.
Yeah, I mean, and looking at the current top 10 of the box office, there's only 2 films in the top 10 that are even at their 5th week of release. One of them is Disney juggernaut of Frozen 2,
Mm-hmm.
which is having its problems at the box office. And then the other is Ford versus Ferrari, which we'll talk about in a second, in the number 10 position, which is in its 6th week of release. But that film has grossed over $100 million and is getting a lot of award season buzz, so more reason for it to stick around a little bit longer than the others. But even here, when it enters its 7th frame of release next weekend, we'll be talking about it as having left the top 10. So,
were you being facetious about Frozen 2 having problems at the box office?
No, I wasn't. I think
Oh, okay.
I think for Disney they were expecting much more out of it, and they're not going to get it.
More than $1 billion?
Not with the immense success of the first film. They were hoping to capitalize on it and exceed that, and it's not going to.
Oh, I don't even know what the first one did.
1.3 billion?
I thought Frozen 2 is over that now.
No, it just hit 1.1.
Oh, it did. Okay.
The goal when you set out to make any sequel is for it to outperform the predecessor. And to me, and even in the episode I did with Christopher Schiller talking about sequels, we did that episode the opening weekend of Frozen 2, and I said, yeah, sure, it had a $130 million opening weekend. I don't see it outperforming its predecessor, which it's still a tight race. I mean, it's in its 5th week of release. It's at $386 million, so it's still 15 million shy of the first film. With the little holiday bump, it could surpass that domestic total. I don't see it passing the worldwide total of the first film. And if you really want to get technical about it and take inflation into account, the first Frozen made more than $401 million with inflation taken into account, and I don't see Frozen 2 meeting that mark. So for Disney, it's still profit, don't get me wrong, but I think they had a lot higher expectation for it. But we'll get to that when we get to Frozen later in the countdown. But yeah, it'll be an interesting point.
Yeah.
Number 10.
So with that, let's get into the top 10 proper. And starting at number 10, down from number 6 this week, is Ford vs. Ferrari, which took in $1.8 million, a 56% drop from last week. The film saw nearly half of its screens disappear as it dropped 1,462 screens to bring its count down to 1,433. The film's still doing very well per theaters. It's still averaging about $1,300 per screen. And with this, in its 6th week of release, it crosses the $100 million mark, and it finds itself at $101.9 million.
Number 9.
Coming in at number 9, down from number 5 this week, is Black Christmas from Universal Pictures. The film took in $1.8 million as well, a 58% drop from last week. No theater count change as it's in its 2nd week of release, and most theaters are contractually obligated to keep a film for 2 weeks without adding or dropping screens. The film's per screen average is $685 per screen this weekend, and in its second week of release, brought its cume up to $7.2 million.
Number 8.
Next up in the countdown, at number 8, down from number 7 this week, is Queen and Slim from Universal Pictures as well. That film took in $1.8 million as well, so it'll be a tight race to see who actually turns out into the 8, 9, and 10 positions based on just the estimates. Queen and Slim saw a 48% drop from last week, losing 482 screens to bring its count down to 1,078. A very healthy $1,700 per screen average here in its fourth week of release, as it brings its cume up to $36.6 million.
Number 7.
In the number 7 position, down from number 4 this week, is Richard Jewell, which took in $2.5 million, a 45% drop from last week. This film also, in its second week of release, does not see a theater count change as it stays in 2,502 screens, a per theater average of just over $1,000, as it brings its cume up to $9.5 million here in its second week of release.
Number 6.
And rounding out the bottom half of the top 10 at number 6, up from number 19 in its first week of expansion, is Bombshell from Lionsgate, which took in just over $5 million. A near 1,500% increase from last week, as it opened in limited screens, only 4 screens, as it now finds itself at 1,480 screens, a 1,476 screen increase from last week. The film averaged just over $3,400 per screen, and here in its second week of release, has made a cume of $5.5 million. So, Brian, looking at the bottom half of the top 10, is anything sticking out to you aside from, the now third remake of Black Christmas that we have to suffer through?
I didn't realize it was the third one. I was just looking at the numbers going, geez, it's gone. Yeah, at only $685 a theater, they're just not going to stay around once their obligations are met. The Richard Jewell thing I find interesting, and I wanted to see that, but it's not something I would go to the theater to see necessarily. To me, it just doesn't seem like, why would I want to pay, $12, $15 a ticket to go see that when you can get just the same enjoyment out of watching it on a TV? And the same thing with Bombshell. That's something I also want to check out, but it's not something, again, I would want to go to the theater to see.
For Black Christmas, to your point, the original Black Christmas was in 1974.
Wow.
And then I remember suffering through a remake in 2006, I believe, that starred Michelle Trachtenberg and some other people, and it wasn't good.
Michelle Trachtenberg from Buffy the Vampire Slayer?
Yes. Or going back to my childhood, Harriet the Spy and Adventures of Pete and Pete on Nickelodeon. Yes, that Michelle Trachtenberg.
Jeez. Okay.
Yeah, so this is the third time they've attempted to make Black Christmas. But here's the thing, and this is always true with genre horror pictures like this. You make them for cheap. The budget of this film's $5 million.
Oh, it is? Okay.
And so even with a piss-poor performance that it had its opening weekend and a follow-up weekend, it still sits at $7.2 million domestically and has some foreign gross behind it as well. So Universal, I don't think, really cares because they're going to make some money on it. They're not going to be a huge money maker, but it's going to make at least a little bit of coin.
When the streaming rights come in and DVD sales and all that, yeah, they'll make some money.
Richard Jewell, I mean, the biggest thing that sticks out to me about Richard Jewell is it's Clint Eastwood.
Yeah.
He does not have box office. I consider this a box office, failure to this point. He doesn't typically have those, and he seems to have one on his hands right now because it's not faring well. I mean, it's faring much better than Black Christmas, which it opened with last weekend, but it's certainly not up to Clint Eastwood standards at the box office.
I just think it's a subject matter, really.
Yeah, I mean, it could be. I mean, one of the things that did kind of cross my desk as I was, reading more about the films is there was a little bit of stir up with Richard Jewell with regards to Olivia Wilde's part in the film. So Olivia Wilde plays a reporter who in the film and supposedly in the true events that happened, essentially offers sex for the scoop.
Okay.
Some people got upset about that because Olivia Wilde is one of the major proponents and people leading the charge for female filmmakers and Me Too movement and the Time's Up and things like that. And so people were upset with her for taking a role where she's kind of demeaning herself and by playing a part where someone offers sex for the scoop, it goes against everything that in real life that she's working towards. And I really liked her response to it. Her response was, look, my job as an actor is to challenge myself as an actor. I shouldn't have to take safe roles. Like if I take safe roles, I'm not going to push myself as an actor. This role for me was challenging because of the things that this person did from a career point of view, get ahead. So she's like, I'm not going to apologize for taking the role.
Good for her.
Yeah, she's like, do I endorse what this person did? No. But you also have to remember when this happened, everything that we're talking about and fighting for now didn't exist. There was no Me Too movement. Women were still very much, subjected and objectified at this time. So this is what happened. It's like,
but even though all this stuff is going on, it doesn't matter. She's portraying somebody real who did this. And regardless of what her beliefs are, what is the problem? I don't see the problem. There shouldn't be a problem.
One of the things that a lot of films have to worry about, and we're going to talk about it a little bit when we get to Cats in a little bit, is it seems like movies now, if anybody is offended by anything that's in the film and they make a stink about it on PR, it almost becomes a death sentence for the film at the box office. I don't agree with that. Like, people make a judgment about the film before it's even come out because of something they read about. I don't get it. Meanwhile, on the other end of the spectrum, you have Bombshell, which is kind of the complete antithesis of what Olivia Wilde's character goes through in Richard Jewell. In Bombshell, you have these women who are being objectified by the higher-ups at Fox, and they strike back. So I think having these two films in the box office at the same time, it portrays two very different ends of the subject matter, the spectrum of that subject matter.
That's why I think Richard Jewell just didn't really appeal to the general audience. It just wasn't something people really cared to see. Or Bombshell, because the Fox thing was a big deal and it was all over the place. They want to see what happened.
Yep. No, I agree. I said, so Bombshell in its first week of expansion fared pretty well. Good per screen average and a good weekend box office take. So I'd be interested to see if this expands further next weekend.
So what is the actual budget for Bombshell?
Looking at Bombshell's statistics, the budget for Bombshell is actually $32 million. A $5 million first week of expansion box office take is promising because I imagine it will expand further, having such a good opening or first week of expansion. And there is award season buzz behind it, so it should have the legs to last through the award season if it gets the nominations. But $32 million is still a bit of a tall order when your first week of expansion is only $5 million.
Yeah. Yes. That's why I was like, I don't know. If it's got legs, then yeah, maybe it'll make it. But if it doesn't, it's going to be a tall order.
Award season has the power to make films stick around for quite a while. And the best example I can give, and a recent example, is look at Green Book. So Green Book a year ago comes out around this time. It actually comes out limited release around Thanksgiving. Its first week of expansion, it did $7 million. That film went on to make $85 million domestically and $300 million worldwide. I can't discount Bombshell just yet, only because I said award season has this magical ability to extend a film's theatrical run by quite a bit.
So how much universal interest do you think this movie would have beyond the United States?
Well, and that is a good question. I think Green Book has more universal themes, and I think that's why it did so well overseas.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see.
Yeah, I think Bombshell really can only play well to a domestic audience because the rest of the world already knows that the Fox News Corporation is corrupt and they don't need a movie to tell them about it. Whereas in the US, we're pretty divisive at the moment. So having a film tell the story and expose what happened would bear interest in a movie-going audience. I think it'll be interesting to see how Bombshell plays out. It also heavily depend on award season and if it actually gets the nominations.
You're listening to The Weekend Take. Visit our Patreon page to become a patron of The Weekend Take, and for as little as $1, you'll receive exclusive content and perks. Number 5.
All right, so now we'll get into the top half of our top 10, starting with number 5, which this week was Knives Out, down from the number 3 position last week. Knives Out takes in $6.1 million a 33% drop from last week. The film from Lionsgate saw a decrease in screen count of 878 screens, bringing its count down to 2,535. The film's still doing very well on the per theater level, as it's still averaging $2,400 per screen, and here in its fourth week of release, it has brought its cume to just shy of $90 million, with an $89.5 million cume.
Number 4.
Coming in at number 4 this week is our first of 2 new releases for the weekend, and that is Cats from Universal Pictures. The film took in $6.5 million on 3,380 screens, a not so good $1,923 per screen for an opening weekend figure, and for a film that sees a 19% on Rotten Tomatoes, which, to put that in context, Black Christmas, which we discussed earlier, has a 38%, and Cats has a 19%.
Wow. I didn't know that.
And it's not just critics, because looking at the CinemaScore, Cats is currently trending with a C+ grade on CinemaScore. CinemaScore, of course, is a grade given by audience members after leaving the theater. So C+ on CinemaScore, a 19% on Rotten Tomatoes, and a very disappointing $6.5 million opening weekend, which doesn't even meet the lowest of expectations, as the film was initially expected to make between $12 and $15 million. And then after the Friday estimates came out, they adjusted accordingly, saying, well, maybe it'll be close to $7 to $8 million. And now we're at $6.5 million. So the film, which cost roughly $100 million to make, looks to lose Universal Pictures quite a bit of money.
Number 3.
Moving on in the countdown, though, we're up to number 3. Down from number 2 this week is Frozen 2 from Walt Disney, which took in $12.3 million, a 36% drop from last week. Frozen sees its theater count drop below 4,000 screens for the first time in its 5 weeks of release, as it loses 413 screens, bringing its count down to 3,665. The film's still averaging well at the box office, with a $3,300 per screen average, and here in its 5th week of release, has brought its cume up to $386.5 million.
Number 2.
Next up in the countdown at number 2 was our box office champ last weekend, Jumanji: The Next Level. This week, Jumanji from Sony Pictures brings in $26 million, a 56% drop from last week. The film saw no change in its theater count, still holding steady at 4,227 screens, a per-screen average of just under $6,200 per screen, and has crossed the $100 million mark here in its 2nd week of release, bringing its cume up to $101.9 million.
Number 1.
Lastly, here we are at the number 1 position for the weekend, to the surprise of no one that it was going to be number 1, but to the surprise of many of what the tally was going to show up being on Sunday afternoon. Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker from Walt Disney took in $175.5 million on 4,406 screens, a per-screen average of just under $40,000 per screen. Now, the $175.5 million of The Rise of Skywalker domestically, combined with its foreign gross, gives the film a $373.5 million opening worldwide, which seems like a lot of money to you and I, but to Disney is a bit of a disappointment. Much like Cats, going into the weekend, Star Wars was expected to make about $215 million for its opening weekend, which would have been right about in line with The Last Jedi, which came out 2 years ago, when that film opened to $220 million. After the Friday estimates came out, Disney adjusted their expectations accordingly and said, okay, well, it's probably going to be closer to 190 or between 190 and $200 million. And yet, here we are, much like Cats, on Sunday afternoon, seeing that the film couldn't even meet that adjusted, lowered expectation. The film opens to $175.5 million, which, to put into context, Star Wars The Force Awakens, which opened 4 years ago, had an opening weekend of about $250 million. 2 years ago, Star Wars Episode 8, The Last Jedi, opened to $220 million. And now here we are with Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker, which apparently could not get the bad taste out of audiences' mouths from The Last Jedi, opening to $175.5 million. Certainly not the trend that Disney was hoping for in a property they paid over $4 billion to start putting out movies for. So, Brian, looking at Star Wars Episode 9, and trust me, it reflects itself in the scores also. So currently, Star Wars Episode 9 is at a 57% on Rotten Tomatoes, which is not favorable. And even in CinemaScore, it's scoring a B plus right now, which Last Jedi and Force Awakens prior to it were both in the A grade. They didn't make it as low as a B plus. So
The Last Jedi actually was in the A's.
it was an A minus.
Really?
Yeah. So this film, the conclusion of the Skywalker saga, after 42 years of waiting for the story to be completely told, is meeting a bit of pushback from the fans, much like The Last Jedi did. And the question really is
And Solo. Don't forget Solo.
they didn't like Solo either, but in with regards to the Skywalker saga itself, the 9 episodes, which Lucas always set out to make 9 films, and here they are, all 9 films. Now, mind you, they did bring in Lucas to consult on episode 9. So, Brian, you and I saw it, and to be honest, I enjoyed it, but certainly wasn't blown away by it. And I left the theater feeling, I don't know, I don't want to say disappointed, but 42 years of saga, 42 years of storytelling leads up to this film, and I wasn't really satisfied afterwards. I mean, I don't know. How did you feel about the film?
I did enjoy it. I had known about a bunch of the leaks. Some of them were spot on. Others were not quite as accurate, but they were still pretty close. I could see where you didn't get that, like an Avengers Endgame, where you got that really satisfying finale feeling. This movie didn't deliver that. It's still, like you, I don't really know how I'm really going to feel about it after a couple days. I might go see it again just to really analyze it now that I've seen it and see how I feel about it. I definitely enjoyed it more than The Last Jedi. The Last Jedi, to me, there was just some dumb things that were done in that.
Yeah, well, like you, I did enjoy it more than Last Jedi, and if I had to place Episode 9 somewhere in the pantheon of 11 Star Wars films, it probably lands middle of the road for me. It wasn't something that blew me away. It wasn't Last Jedi bad. It wasn't Episode 2 bad. It wasn't great. But now looking at it from a box office perspective, yes, $175.5 million is a lot of money, and a bigger opening than every other Star Wars picture short of Episode 7 and 8. And studios would only hope to have a film that opens to $175.5 million. But Disney is in the business of making tentpole blockbusters. I gotta feel that they sat around this morning, Sunday, looking at these estimates. They can't be happy. They couldn't. There's no way. What's the best explanation that you could give as to why the continuing declining trend of the opening weekends for this new trilogy?
Well, for this movie in particular, I think that the fandom menace really did what they say they were going to do and not show up. It sure seems that way. Hard to say for sure, but it could be too that maybe a lot of the general fans didn't connect with it as much as they did with the other films. Like you and I are going, yeah, it's good, but it just doesn't, it's meh.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't build itself up like you've got to see it. It's the last. You got to go, like they did with Endgame. And they didn't really deliver, I think, on the feels either, like they did in Endgame.
So we'll have to see how Episode 9's kind of box office trajectory plays out from here, and what kind of shifts that causes in Disney's plans. Looking ahead to next week, there's only 4 total what's considered wide releases. There's the wide release expansion of Uncut Gems. There is Spies in Disguise from Blue Sky Studios starring Will Smith that comes out wide. There is Little Women gets a wide release, and another film called Friendsgiving Day 2. But looking at everything coming out between now and including Christmas Day, and there's a couple limited releases on the 27th, I expect fully that Rise of Skywalker will be number 1 again next week. The question is, by how much? So $175.5 million opening weekend, I would not be surprised to see this film suffer a 60% or greater loss its second weekend.
I'm going to go with you on that. I think it's going to be a 60% drop.
Right. So, I mean, looking at a 60% drop, I mean, you're talking about a second weekend that is closer to the range of about $75 million. So I'm going to say that that's my guess. 75 million is my guess for episode 9 second weekend.
Mm-hmm. I think Spies in Disguise will probably be that will be number 2 next week with all the kids.
Yeah, well, I think it'll be number 2 just because it's a new release and it's going to make more than whatever drop Jumanji faces in its third weekend. Star Wars takes number 1 again for the second weekend in a row, but I think it suffers a very big drop. I'm guessing around the realm of 60%, so I'm going to guess a $75 million second weekend.
Well, can't wait to see. If it's more than that, boy, we can probably say that maybe it won't make $1 billion.
I guess that's possible as well. One last little thing to get your opinion on. Given the opening weekend of this film, and possibly what the trajectory is for it, of all the films that have been released since Disney acquired Lucasfilms, looking at Rogue One is probably the closest comparable. Rogue One opened to 155 million. Do you think Rogue One ends up making more than Episode 9?
I would say it's going to depend on the second week drop, because right now all the kids are going to be on Christmas vacation, and that's going to give us an idea. And if it's 60% or more, I think there's a chance it may not make it. Because remember, China is not a huge fan of Star Wars, so they're not going to come and save the franchise. You look at the box office numbers for China, and they're low. They're not big.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and China's one of the biggest markets, behind the U.S. domestic market.
Yep.
Yeah. All right, we'll have to see. That'll be next weekend, but for this week, that about wraps it up for us here at the Weekend Take. So one more time, Brian, just let everyone know where or how they can find out more about you and what you do.
You can find me at facebook.com/Brian Zipatowski, and Sean will tell you how to spell that. circuitryfilms.com, circuitrysound.com, also on LinkedIn, Production Hub, and Staff Me Up. And also on Instagram at circuitry_sound_films.
All right, great. Like I said, I'll put some pertinent links, including the spelling of your name, in the episode description. Please be sure to check out The Weekend Take as well on social media. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/The Weekend Take. And please be sure to check out our Patreon campaign at www.patreon.com/The Weekend Take, where for as little as $1 per month, you can become a patron of The Weekend Take and get exclusive access to extended cuts of episodes in case you want to hear more about the conversation Brian and I had today or any of our previous guests on the show. You also get early access to standard cuts of the episodes before public release. And starting this season, you get Patreon patron exclusive episodes, which you can check out. And also you get a sticker to show us off to your friends. And also some more perks coming in 2020, but stick with us on social media to hear more about that as it comes about. But otherwise, that wraps it up for us here at The Weekend Take. So, Brian, thank you again for coming on the show.
Thank you very much. I had fun. And remember, sound is half the picture.
Yes, sound is half the picture. But for all of our listeners that are listening this week, thank you very much for tuning in, and we will catch you all next week. Have a good day. Bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to The Weekend Take. Be sure to subscribe on iTunes and Google Play, and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Visit our Patreon page to become a patron of The Weekend Take, and for as little as $1, you'll receive exclusive content and perks.